How the market revolution transformed America's economy and society. How did America go from small, self-sufficient farms to a booming industrial economy? The answer lies in the market revolution, a period of rapid change that reshaped business, transportation, and society itself. But what caused this revolution? And what were the consequences, both good and bad? Let's dive into one of the most pivotal periods in American history. Alright, let's start off by talking about the era of good feelings. When James Monroe became president in 1817, he went on a big nationwide PR tour, and people ate it up. Even in Boston, where Federalists used to hate guys like him, he was welcomed with open arms. The press ran with it, calling it the era of good feelings. And yeah, it looked like a time of unity. The Federalist Party was basically dead, so Monroe's Democratic Republicans were the only game in town. With no real political opposition, things seemed peaceful. He even won re-election in 1820 with almost no competition, just one random electoral vote against him. Meanwhile, the economy was changing fast. For a long time, most Americans lived out Jefferson's ideal, small, independent farms producing just enough for themselves. But that was starting to shift, thanks to new technology, better transportation, and expanding markets. More and more people were producing goods to sell rather than just to survive. Prices weren't just set by local trade anymore. Instead, a growing national and even global economy was shaping what people made and how much they earned, just like Alexander Hamilton had imagined. People were making more goods than ever, but getting them anywhere was a nightmare. If you thought modern shipping delays were bad, try waiting 3 months for your grain to take the scenic route around Florida. For that reason, this era wasn't just about people changing how they worked, it was about finally figuring out how to move stuff efficiently. In the 18th century, getting anything to market was a logistical nightmare. Roads were basically glorified dirt paths. Transportation was painfully slow, and long-distance trade was so expensive that it was literally cheaper to ship goods to England than to send them 30 miles over land. Imagine ordering something online and realizing the cheapest shipping option is via a boat to another continent first. That's how bad things were. Take Cincinnati, for example. If you wanted to send goods to New York, the fastest way wasn't a straight shot east. Nope, you had to float everything down the Mississippi River, out to the Gulf of Mexico, swing around Florida like you were on some colonial road trip, and then crawl up the Atlantic coast. A 3-month journey that somehow still made more sense than taking a direct overland route. Just think about that. Sailing around an entire state was easier than driving across it. But things finally started improving. Better roads, many financed by tolls, made travel slightly less of a disaster. And even the federal government got in on the action, building the national road from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way to Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, I know, West Virginia doesn't exactly scream economic powerhouse. But hey, it was a start. At the time, this was a huge deal, laying the groundwork for a more connected, faster-moving economy. One that didn't require a 3-month river adventure just to sell some flour. If roads were a step forward, canals were a revolution, made possible by the steamboat. Before steam power, upriver travel was grueling. But in 1807, Robert Fulton's Clermont changed everything, making river transport faster and cheaper. This sparked a canal boom, with New York leading the way. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, turned NYC into a trade hub and fueled the rise of cities like Buffalo and Rochester. But railroads had the biggest impact. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad launched in 1828, and by 1860, 30.000 miles of track crisscrossed the U.S., slashing shipping costs and travel time. Meanwhile, the telegraph revolutionized communication, letting businesses check prices and plan shipments instantly. No more fighting battles 2 weeks after they ended. But if trains and telegraphs reshaped how goods and information moved, nothing changed how things were made quite like the rise of the factory. Factories didn't just change how things were made, they changed everything about work itself. Before this, most goods were crafted by skilled artisans who took pride in making an entire product from start to finish. But factories? Factories were all about speed and efficiency. Workers were gathered in one place, assigned a single repetitive task, and told to do it over and over again. It wasn't exactly fulfilling, but it got the job done faster and cheaper. At first, these factories were built along rivers because they ran on water power. That's why New England, with its abundance of waterfalls, became the first industrial hub. But once steam power came along in the 1840s, factories could pop up anywhere, especially in booming cities across the Midwest. And with them came the rise of mass production, where interchangeable parts made manufacturing even more efficient. This system, which started in New England, would go on to define American industry for decades. It was fast, it was efficient, and it made a whole lot of money, but let's just say it wasn't exactly a worker's paradise. So here's the thing. Building a whole new economy isn't cheap. You can't just start digging a canal and hope some optimistic boaters chip in along the way. Massive projects like roads, railroads, and factories needed serious cash up front. And that meant the old way of doing business wasn't going to cut it. That's where the limited liability corporation came in. Basically, it let investors throw money into big ventures without risking their entire life savings. If the business flopped, they lost what they put in, but not their house, their land, or their collection of vintage powdered wigs. It made risk-taking a whole lot easier, which meant more people were willing to finance ambitious projects. Sure, this system has its critics, especially when corporations screw up with zero personal consequences. But let's be real, it helped fuel the insane economic growth of the next 2 centuries. Now, we all love a good rags to riches story, the lone genius. The bold entrepreneur, the fearless risk-taker who builds an empire from nothing. But not today. While businesses were expanding and industrialists were making fortunes, the government was quietly laying the foundation for their success. Back then, starting a business wasn't as simple as filling out paperwork and paying a fee. You needed a government charter, which often required political connections. But starting in the 1830s, states changed that by passing general incorporation laws, making it much easier for businesses to form and grow. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court played referee in cases like Gibbons versus Ogden, which struck down a steamboat monopoly in New York, and the Charles River Bridge case, which made it clear that competition was good for the economy. At the same time, the federal government was busy funding roads and canals to improve transportation, while states were handing out generous deals to railroad companies. So, despite the romanticized idea of rugged, independent entrepreneurs building the economy with nothing but hard work and ingenuity, the reality was a bit different. They had a helping hand, one that made sure the economy didn't just grow, but thrived. So, while all these new markets and industries were booming, traditional craftsmen started realizing they had to keep up or get left behind. Shoemakers, for example, ditched custom orders for mass production, and factories replaced apprenticeships with assembly line efficiency. Employers prioritized profits over mentorship, turning the workplace into business, not family. In theory, workers had more freedom, but in reality, many were trapped in low-paying, unstable jobs. Northern elites claimed hard work led to success. But labor activists saw the truth. Capitalism favored the rich while workers barely got by. Even Thomas Jefferson feared that wage labor made men unfit for citizenship, as dependence on employers mirrored the subjugation of slavery. So, what did people do? Well, a lot of them just packed up and left. With farmland disappearing in New England, young men had already been heading west for years. And after the War of 1812, the floodgates really opened. Between 1790 and 1840, 4.5 million people moved past the Appalachians, and 6 new states popped up in just 6 years. Ohio alone exploded from 231,000 people in 1810 to over 2 million by 1850. Even Florida, full of swamps and mosquitoes, became a hot spot after the U.S. bought it from Spain in 1819. This westward migration fed into the whole manifest destiny idea, the belief that Americans had a God-given right to take over the continent, at the expense of, well, everyone else. But with so many young men leaving, factory owners had a problem. Who was going to work these jobs? First, they tried hiring Yankee women. But as industrialization picked up, they turned to immigrants, especially the Irish, who were escaping famine and poverty. Not surprisingly, many workers weren't thrilled with their new reality. The economy had its ups and downs, And while the country got richer, factory workers often got poorer. This led to the rise of labor movements like the working men's parties, which later evolved into unions demanding better wages and conditions. In the end, the market revolution transformed America in ways both exciting and challenging. Some people saw new opportunities, while others felt trapped by long hours and low wages. Some packed up and moved west, chasing freedom, while others fought for better working conditions. History has a way of repeating itself, so what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments.